So today we're going to look at X and Y intercepts, and we're going to look at graphs looking at our X and Y intercepts, and then we're also going to find X and Y intercepts from equations. So remember, an X-intercept okay, so intercepts are where the graph crosses the X or Y axis. Okay, so an X-intercept happens when Y is equal to 0. A Y-intercept happens when X is equal to a 0. Okay, so functions have multiple, most of them, how about this? Most of them have multiple X-intercepts, okay? It may not have an X-intercept. So a graph that is a parabola that opens up is not going to have an X-intercept. Okay, so functions can have more than one X-intercept or none. I'll say that, or none. Okay, but they can only have one Y-intercept. Okay. All right, so let's look at those graphs that I gave you. I want to find the X and the Y intercepts of each one of these functions here. Okay, so let's look at this number one here. So remember, this is here's my X axis, and here is my f of X axis, which that means that that's my Y axis, right? So does this graph cross the X axis anywhere? No. So it's going to have no X-intercepts. The Y-intercept is where it's going to cross the Y-axis. So it's going to cross the Y-axis at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At Y equals 5. Okay? So that means my X value is 0 and my Y value is a 5. Alright, so I want you to do those other three for me. So this one, number 2, number 3, and then number 4 for me. I want you to do all three of those for me. So take about 10 minutes and go through those. Okay, so let's look at the X-intercept. It crosses the X-axis in two places. So it's going to have, here's my Y-axis here, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be at 3, 0, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and at 7, 0. the y-intercept is where it's going to cross the y-axis. So down here, so that's going to be at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so -6. So 0, comma, -6 there. Okay, all right, so let's look at number 3 down here. So it's going to cross the y-axis. It's going to cross the x-axis, x-axis, x-axis. So 3 times it's crossing the x-axis. So my x-intercept will be at 1, 0, at 2, 0, and then at 3, 0. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied to you. And over here, and a -1, 0. Sorry, I'm blind today. And then the y-intercept is crossing the y-axis way up here. So it's going to cross the y-axis at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at 0, 6. Okay. All right, so what about here? It's going to cross the x-axis here and again there. So my x-intercepts we're going to be at, what values at 1, 2, 3, 4 at -4, 0, and 1, 2, 2, 0. And then the y-intercept, so here's my y-axis here, it's going to cross it right there, so it's at a -1, 2. So that's at a 0, -2. Okay. All right. So when you are asked to find zeros, so zeros of functions are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So to find a zero, set the function equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so zeros of functions are basically the x-intercepts. So to find zeros of functions, you're found in the x-intercept, so that means that you are letting y equal 0 to find the y-intercept. Then you will evaluate the function at 0. Okay, so now we're going to look at some functions and we are going to find the x and y intercepts algebraically. Okay, so let's look here. So find the zeros and the y-intercepts. So the zeros are when we are going to set the function equal to 0. So that means that I'm going to set 2x squared minus 7x minus a 4. I'm going to set that equal to a 0. and I'm going to solve. Okay, so I'm going to factor. So 2 times -4 is a -8. So what multiplies together to give you -8 and adds together to give you a 7? Divide both of those by 2 here. So this will be x minus a 4 times 2x plus a 1. Set both of those equal to a 0. So x will be equal to a 4 and x will be equal to a -1/2. So these are considered your zeros of your function. Can be written in set notation like this. The y-intercept is found when you evaluate f of 0. So that means everywhere you see an x, you are going to plug in a 0. So 0 squared times that, so this is going to be a -4. So the y-intercept is going to be at 0, -4. Okay? All right, y'all do this one for me. So take a few minutes and do this one. Finding the zeros and the y-intercept. Okay? So the zeros are where you let the function be equal to a 0. So we'll say x to the 4th minus 5x squared plus a 4 is equal to a 0. Can this factor? So this will be x squared minus a 4 times x squared minus a 1. This can factor again, so this will be x minus a 2 times x plus a 2. Factor, this one can factor again, so x minus 1 times x plus a 1. Set all those equal to 0, so x will be equal to a 2, x will be equal to a -2, x will be equal to a 1, and x will be equal to a -1. So it's going to cross the x-axis in 4 places. So the y-intercept is when you evaluate the function at 0. So we'll have 0 to the 4th minus 5 times 0 squared plus a 4. So f of 0 will be 4. So the y-intercept will be 0, comma, positive 4. Okay. All right, I'll do this one. Find the zeros and then find the y-intercepts. Okay, so the zeros are where the function equals 0. So we'll have x cubed minus a 6x squared minus a 7x is equal to a 0. You can factor out an x, so you'll be left with x squared minus a 6x minus a 7. And then this can factor to x minus 7 times x plus a 1. And then we set each one of these equal to 0. So x will be equal to 0. X will be a positive 7, and x will be a -1. So your zeros are -1, 0, 7. The y-intercept. So y-intercept is where the function is evaluated at 0. So that'll be 0 cubed minus 6 times 0 squared minus 7 times 0. So the y-intercept is actually going to be at 0, 0. Okay. All right, I'll do this one for me. So find the zeros and then find the y-intercept. Okay, so the zeros are where we set the function equal to 0. Okay, so this is a radical equation, so we'll move the -2 to the other side, and then we will get rid of the radical by squaring both sides. So we'll have x plus 1 is equal to a 4, so x is going to be equal to a 3. So the 0 is just going to be a 3. It's crossing the x-axis one place. And the y-intercept is where you are going to evaluate the function at 0. So we will have 0 plus a 1 underneath the square root minus a 2. So we'll have the square root of a 1 minus a 2. So square root of 1 is a 1. So f of 0 is going to be equal to a -1. So the y-intercept is 0, -1. Okay? Okay, so homework, try to do the graphing part of your homework and then the solving, finding your x and y intercepts algebraically. And then on Monday, we will finish up the other part of your homework. Okay? If you have any questions about anything, let me know. Y'all have a great day.